one is receiving a set of previous minutes, and the second one is on our submission to the local government around their draft code of conduct. So, Jordan, if I can get you to open with the Karakia, thanks.
Takitiho ki te uru, whakatakitiho ki te tonga, ke mā kine ki uta, ke mā taratara ki te he aka ana te ahatikura, he tio, he whuka, he hauhu, tihei mauri.
Both Jen and Pam are online. Yep. So
Pamela can't hear the room. Hang on a minute.
Oh, yeah, I can hear it now. Thanks.
Oh, very good.
thanks, Pam. Confirmation of the agenda. Happy to move. Thanks, Bruce. All those in favour?
Bruce, you can't. This is the alternate.
Okay, she's
Thank you, Chris. And carried. Are there any disclosures of interest for the item on the agenda today?
Nope.
No, that's silence. So nothing there. Thanks, Jordan. Right, next up is the submission subcommittee minutes from the 21st of May.
Get a move.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Chris. All in favour? Aye. Opposed? So carried. That moves us on to the main item of the day, which is our, that's old minutes, which is the council submission to the Local Government Commission's draft code of conduct. We were asked to give any feedback or discussion points through to Dave, which I see there was only one around public being able to make a complaint. So I'll hand over to you, Dave, to lead us through, please.
Alrighty. Morning, everyone. I'll keep this purposely brief, and we'll see if we can get you out of here at a respectable hour, i.e. 10 o'clock. So happy to take the report as read. I'll note 3 key points that in preparing the submission, staff have purposely left the materiality aspects of the code to elected members, as has been the case in the development of past codes of conduct. So our feedback from a staff perspective is on process matters only. That doesn't affect the actual application of the code. It's more behind the scenes of how it's dealt with. And the last thing that I will note for your attention is one of those process points is that section 12 of the draft code allows for the insertion of council policies to be covered by the code. And we have submitted on that what the process should or is for that to happen. Like, does the Secretary of Local Government review those? Do council do that by way of resolution? So that's just a bit of a question mark that we've raised. But happy to leave it there. As Councillor Mars noted, we've had one feedback from a councillor, which was about who could make a complaint under the code, excluding the public. And other than that, code set as it has been presented by the Commission.
Question on that one?
Yeah, no.
That piece around the member of the public complaint seems to me like a sticking point always, because anybody can make a complaint at any time, and if you don't have a process for it, then, well, for one, it makes the institution not look great, and secondly, some people then default to doing this on behalf of a member of the public or something. It just seems like simply saying no member of the public, it leaves it a bit hanging. And so one thing I'd thought about in the past was about if you had an intermediary that kind of filters the vexatious stuff out, but still gives a process. Does anybody have any views on that? Just thought we could add to, we don't like members of the public using this in the wrong way, but what is the path?
So if it helps, the code does have a process for filtering out those vexatious complaints.
Yeah, I did see
Fun that is noted.
I guess I was just thinking of
yeah, from the public point of view, the way to think of this in the easiest terms is to liken it to delegations. So the code of conduct provides delegations on how a complaint is dealt with, say from staff or other members. If no delegation exists for the member of the public to make a complaint and we receive one, then council holds those delegations and we would basically write a report and send it to council.
Yes, and then I'm thinking it will happen differently again at every council. And so it'd be nice if this kind of addressed that to some degree. That was my only feedback. I don't really mind so much what it is. It's just we're trying to make things a bit more uniform.
Dave, just in terms of who makes a determination as to whether it's a vexatious complaint or not?
That's a very good question.
Because in law, it's quite clear, vexatious litigants generally get identified because of their continual harassment, we'll put it another way. And does the similar sort of rules apply?
It is, and the quote investigator unquote that the draft code sets out does have the power to decide if a complaint is material or not. In other words, if it's of a nature that makes sense. And that investigator does hold a lot of power. They can dismiss the complaints, they can request that the parties mediate, and likewise, if the investigator makes a final ruling, that's not appealable.
Yeah, the problem with that is, and there's a live example of that which has happened up north in the last 18 months, where the same person's made 2 complaints, have been gone through, it's cost significant tens of thousands of dollars, and both of them have been thrown out. And these complaints were made by a councillor. So, they were vexatious, and if they'd have been investigated properly internally, they would never have gone past that stage. So I'm
That's right.
just questioning who's involved in that process of determining that.
So section 19 and 21 really pull that into perspective.
But don't give a lot of detail on
No, it is very light on detail.
Investigator, because that's one of my concerns. Is
And
that
of course, our $1 million question is who is an investigator and who appoints them?
and who pays for them? Because
Well,
I would say that there are
You pay for them. That's,
no, but it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, I would say a lot of people are put off by putting in a code of conduct because they don't want to cost the council money, but they might want to have something investigated, for example. So it's a real tension.
so what the new code sets out is that the chief executive would receive the complaint. And once he receives the complaint, he informs the parties that he's received the complaint. He informs the person that the complaint's against, and he hands it over to the investigator who will make a preliminary assessment. And at that point, the complaint can be ruled vexatious, and that's the end. But it still does involve that investigator taking that first step.
Which is not how we deal with it now.
No.
So that means you're incurring costs for something which may be frivolous.
Yeah. And then we see how sometimes the email system is used to harass through like 1,000 emails might arrive. And then what are you going to open 1,000 cases? Half of them could be bots anyway, but you never know. But it's how to manage this in the new world.
and there is scope for the investigator, depending on what they term the materiality or the seriousness of the complaint. They can hand that back to the mayor or chairperson, depending on what kind of council is involved, for them to deal with. And then that refers us around to, if you're looking in the section 33. So non-material, non-serious complaints are then handled by the chairperson.
Quite like to advocate for a centralized investigator type service rather who could then weigh up all the different scenarios from 78 different councils and
Right.
have a bit of a scale of what's vexatious and what's serious. And because I just think otherwise it turns into a big money making exercise for a variety of individual investigators.
And generally speaking, we've seen code of conduct complaints that have been managed externally. Those investigators are generally people with legal background, lawyers.
Expensive.
The code is silent on the investigator side. We don't know whether the investigator, for example, would be an appointed lawyer, whether there would be a pool, whether the local government commission would provide those.
I would like to advocate for that. I
And-
just think if you put it council by council, you've got really different playing fields between Waikato, most ratepayers, to Hamilton City, to Auckland City.
I think even, Dave, the possibility for me, having that intermediate step where the CE has a bit more oversight and decision making first, to look at it, whether they can mediate between the parties first and foremost prior to going to that investigator.
Yeah.
Because we do talk about ourselves and our own one going to a mediator as a next step. And I just wonder if we could word something around that picking up, and then obviously clarity around who qualifies as an investigator, which, as you say,
So
is missing.
what we've put in the submission so far is
Can you refer to a page just so we're all?
page 17 of the agenda.
Yeah.
And we've made a submission point about point 24, which is on receipt of the complaint under the code, the chief executive will refer the complaint to an investigator. In that section, we've sought there to be more clarity and transparency about who the investigators are.
Yeah.
And who appoints them. As well, qualification standards for how their impartiality, and quite importantly that you raised earlier, Warren, is whether there's a process for challenging the appointment, but the appointment's like the early stages, noting that the decision itself can't be challenged either.
Yeah.
So we could extend that section out to include that there should be an intermediary step for.
Well, I think if we're agreed around the table, and noting Bruce wants to speak, yeah, just that ability of the CE to perhaps look at a step of mediation first prior to then going to an investigator. It just seems we're straight away, as soon as there's a code of conduct called, it comes to the CE who has to pass it on to an investigator, bang, and we're into that expensive process straight away.
Yeah.
There's no sort of intermediate step now where they're removing that ability for us to have that.
Yeah. And from past experience, and I put a lot of effort into the one that we wrote last training, end of last training. As soon as it goes to the investigation stage, you're into a place of somebody's wrong, somebody's right. It's very adversarial, and then it's very hard to backtrack from there. And it's very hard to repair relationships and mana and stuff. So anything to bolster the going serious.
There is a degree of, well, I wouldn't say comfort, there's a degree of movement for the investigator to move to mediation rather than that adversarial process. But of course, that would be totally at the discretion of the investigator.
Yeah. Which is quite, I mean, because sometimes things can be solved with a cup of coffee.
Well, and
Brought over the head.
yeah, it's that lower level stuff we're probably thinking about in that space.
Yeah, it's lower level stuff that then escalates the bigger stuff. But if you don't address the lower stuff, well, if you don't address it, it goes to the bigger stuff.
Yeah, and I guess in a roundabout way, they have worded it that while they've introduced the investigator at the start, if he decides that it's a lower level immaterial type complaint, there is that avenue for it to leave his or her framework back to the chair. But I mean, one would ask what would happen if the complaint is about the chair. That's the next.
Yeah, exactly. That did come up.
Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, I've just got a couple of questions about scope and timing of code of conduct. I'm interested in knowing, does code of conduct cease to apply to our last meeting of the triennial, for example? And also, does it apply to all forms of communication, social media, electioneering material, all sorts of written or spoken activities?
The first one's really easy. The code of conduct would apply until you leave office. So, yeah, as far as the communications go, hang on, page 6 of the old code. So the code does have a section in it about the use of social media, and probably this is page 41 of the agenda, section 7.3. And in a roundabout fashion, the code refers everyone back to the standing orders. Elected members may express their personal opinions at any council, committee or subcommittee meeting within the limits, and that kind of applies to the social media as well. Once a matter has been determined at a council meeting, it becomes council's position until it's changed by a council decision. So essentially that implies that obviously when members are making statements in social media, they need to be clear that the statements they're making in their personal capacity. So if I put probably the electoral hat on, given that it's electoral advertising, say in the election period, that would be assumed to be a personal statement and not representative council. So there is a little bit of leeway in that.
There are some other pieces in there about misrepresentation. Institution.
And it's really interesting that it talks elected members may voice their own opinion to the news media and council committee, provided they clearly state when they're expressing a majority collective view and when they're expressing a personal or minority opinion. So in dealing with the media and social media, that would be counted under the media part of.
Yep.
Elected members must clarify whether they're communicating a view. So that's covered off by the actual being an election advertisement. Comments must not misrepresent the views of the council or other elected members. So there is a little bit of scope in there about the use of social media. And it's it's in line with the advice that the electoral officers were given the candidate evenings before the elections to basically keep it factual, keep it
Factual.
Keep it in, try to avoid the barbs that we see from time to time.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think you've answered that. And so at the precise time then is at the end of our last meeting?
No, you'll be in office until, let me think, Friday, the 7th of October. So it's until, I can't quite remember, it's either until the election day itself or until the public notice is published with the results of the election.
Which is the 11th.
Which is, we do a preliminary on the 11th and then the statutory notice is a few days after that when we get the final results.
Yeah.
So it's somewhere.
So is that actually covered in that document? That's what I'm interested in.
The current code doesn't really talk about the election period as such. So it does need to be a clear delineation between the election and your council.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've asked the question.
I had another question on, if we're moving on capacity. So it says in your capacity as an elected member, and I know last training we had a few questions around whether somebody was in a different capacity or not. How do you interpret it, Dave, from the way this is written? Because I thought it was still leaving things a bit open. It's very clear that it's in whenever you're talking to staff or, other elected members, but have you had any thoughts on that, Dave?
Off the top of my head, I would just reiterate that you need to be very clear in which hat you're wearing at a particular time. Whether, for example, whether you're acting as a candidate in the election versus whether you're acting as a sitting councillor, and then again versus if you're acting as chair or a committee chair. So there's three and for example, committee chairs and chairs get I would almost call it enviable task of having to be the face of decisions of their committees, whether they like them or not. So you become almost the voice and supporter of something that you may not, with your election hat on, agree with.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot of times when we don't stand up and say which hat we're wearing, and there's a lot of interpretation by somebody who might make a complaint, like
That's right.
which one you might be at that point in time. And I think it just leaves a lot of questions not clear from the way this is written. Yeah.
And we would kind of try and gauge it on the medium almost comes into a little bit of this. So for example, if you made a comment on your personal Facebook page, we would say you're doing that as in your capacity as a person. If you had a page that said you were a regional councillor and you made the comment on that, we would say that you've made that comment in your position as a councillor. So the medium can play a lot into that. And likewise, for print media, for example, if you're quoted in print media and we've interviewed councillor such and such, then it would be assumed that you're speaking on as a councillor. But if they stated in there that your opinions were personal, then that obviously flips it on its head a little bit. And of course, everything election is outside of the scope really, because that's assumed to be electoral.
Yeah, that's all good. I guess just thinking that it's if I probably just doubling down now on my point around if you had a central investigator office or then you'd have a way of building up that guidance like you just gave over time, because I don't think people will know these details, first thing next training, for example, or and it'd be nice for it not to be different at every council because you'll just get a mixture of expectations and performance again. Yeah.
And I think that's partly the intent of this, is to standardise so there is a broader understanding of what the obligations are from a New Zealand point of view, rather than.
Yeah, I do think in our induction we get quite a lot of clarity around standing orders and codes of conduct, etc. And there's always going to be a grey area on something somewhere along the, an example's going to come up that doesn't quite meet what's in the book. That's always
They never line up with what's
going to happen. Yeah, of course it is.
Yeah. Oh, it's more differences between councils, differences. But there's so much subjectivity with the investigator. Just be nice to standardise it a bit. That was all.
But and anything else? Do we? I did note with Dave earlier, just in talking, you can't appeal as sanctions. You have no right of appeal against the investigators' outcome. Is there anything that anyone else feels that we should make a comment around any piece of that, or anything else for that matter? Basically, before we sort of close this off, and also I'll come back to you, Dave, if there is anything that you think that you need our comments around. I know you did sort of highlight something at the beginning, which it doesn't sound like.
So I can do a quick recap.
Yep.
So from our point of view, you have covered off a lot of the same things that we have, like the process of the investigator being appointed, what the qualifications are, because that will also lead into the cost, right? That's part and parcel of that. The notes I've taken during the meeting is for the chief executive to have a bit more oversight to deal with vexatious complaints before the investigator becomes resolved, as a way of filtering out those immaterial complaints before they get any further. And the other point that I've noted is the inability to appeal the investigator's outcome. So in that question, we would suggest that there should be some sort of appeals process set down. The last thing I'll add, of course, is that while the code talks about sanctions, we find ourselves in the space that legislative changes and come the sanctions as essentially non-binding. So somebody that is sanctioned could essentially say, well, I'm not doing that, and there's no avenue to do anything about that, aside from council's power, for example, to remove them from standing committees or as chairs and so forth. There is a piece of work being done by the Department of Internal Affairs looking at that, which is separate, and you can all expect that probably at some point to come across the table.
On that one, I had a question around the last part of page 13, 50. And we've written that section, the amendment that suspended that is set out. That included participating and voting. Seems. So that's always been quite enshrined, that you can always participate no matter what in every meeting, and you can definitely vote in whatever meeting you choose. So that's quite a strong statement.
It is quite interesting that the code allows for the sanctioning of members, but you're quite right, a member cannot be prevented from participating in the local authority meeting, i.e. council.
Or voting, which is what this
is. Or voting, so that would be untouched. The way this code is worded, however, is that you can essentially sanction a member which then contravenes their rights set out in another part of the code by doing so. So in one part of the code, it protects their right to vote and participate. In the other part of the code, you're saying you can remove that right.
Yes.
So we've sought for them to just clarify that.
Okay, so that's what you're trying to do with
Yeah.
that.
Did you get that clarity, Pam?
Oh, no, I just couldn't quite hear what you were saying, Jen. I get the gist of what Dave's response was to it, but I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were.
Yeah, it sounded to me like we're advocating to take people's rights to attend or vote.
Sorry, it's just the sound is going in and out there.
Oh, strange.
That's weird.
Just for Jen, though.
I'll get
so
Dave to
maybe-
say it.
Okay.
So what the proposed code says is that if a complaint is upheld, the investigator can impose a sanction. And one of the sanctions set out is, hang on a minute, suspending the elected member from committees or other representative bodies. So it doesn't remove them from council. So that's section 43. If I jump to section 58, the rights of members include the right to attend and participate in any meeting of the authority, local board, committee or subcommittee. Well, if you take that right away with section 43, you're automatically in conflict with section 58 because you've removed the rights that the code protects. So they need to figure out
Which one
which
takes
one
precedence?
takes precedent over the other.
We're advocating for.
We didn't take an opinion on either way of that. The current code does allow for members to be removed from committees. We just do it in a slightly different way in that council would resolve to revoke membership.
But you can still attend. Yeah. And by revoking membership, you're revoking the voting.
Yes, and speaking rights, of course.
That sounds fine then.
I think the only other one was just obviously that point Noel raised. I heard Jen's opinion that you're happy that public stay in as
No, I'd like a filter that if public stay in, it goes through a filter of some sort, which is a person who would assess whether it's vexatious or not. I wouldn't want the CE to suddenly have to raise everything to the investigator the way it's written.
And I think we've sort of covered that in the CE having more oversight in the vexatious complaints.
That should be fine.
Sorry, can I just clarify? Are we saying that we're happy for members of the public to be able to file complaints?
At this stage, the submission opposes members of the public.
Opposes it. Yes, great. I just wanted to clarify because that's certainly what I would advocate for is that that this is really about other counselors.
Yeah.
That's who can participate in this or staff through the CE. Is that correct? Have I got
That's
that
right.
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you note the process I did highlight before about what happens if we do get a material complaint from the public, and that it would then probably become a matter for council to deal with by way of a report?
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm just wondering, I understand what we were saying before about the chief executive getting to decide whether it goes or having that intermediary step before it goes to a investigator. Given that the complainants and the people they were complaining about would be counselors and the chief executive is the only employee of the counselors, have we sought the CE's thoughts about that? I think it's really important because we don't want to assign a duty to a chief executive that inherently feels conflicted for them.
Yeah, well, we have seen that in the past, haven't we, Pamela? So the CE is in a role in the hierarchy underneath the councillors, and so you're asking them to deal with complaint about one of his employers. It's a real weird tension, and it would be nice if there was a way to address that, because I have heard up and down the country about some pretty nasty relationships between chairs or mayors or and the CE.
Current process now though?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I thought it was.
What's changed?
It's just a.
Well, we ran through this previously and what we decided.
I was just raising the concern, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, no, appreciate that.
More pointing out that they might like to think about that in their final determination.
Okay, so the current process is if a complaint is made, then they're forwarded to the chief executive. The chief executive will then establish the complaints working group. That's essentially where we pull the names out of a hat of the members to sit on the panel. So the chief executive doesn't determine what is or isn't vexatious in our current code. That working group would do that as the first step. If the chief executive happens to be the complainant, then the chair takes his place in that process.
So I suppose I just was in my mind trying to compare and contrast that to what is being proposed here.
So it is quite different. The current code does not provide for the chief executive to rule in or out complaints, and that responsibility falls to the working group that's formed on the receipt of a complaint.
Yeah.
The chief executive is actually in the best position to make that call. He's on both sides. He understands the position, so I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, it's the best we've come up with, I think, but it's not ideal. It's all we were kind of pointing out. It has
Okay.
led to issues elsewhere.
Anything else?
The system will lead to issues.
So we have obviously got a little bit of input in there, which will come back to myself and Marley. Is that correct as it stands, Dave?
Yep.
So we'll come back to myself and Marley, and that we missions. Yep. So I'm happy to move that. Second, thanks, Chris. All those in favour? Opposed? So carried. I'll come to you for a closing, Karakia. Thank you, Jordan. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Are we going to, is it appropriate that we discuss the attendance at meetings online?
Yeah, it's not something that's on the agenda, but it's a question that it sort of floats between obviously standing orders and code of conduct. So we have a democracy person at our beck and call. In fact, two of them.
So when would we have that discussion, Dave?
So what do you want to outline? Just what you
give us the outline, and I can.
Well, I've got concerns about the level of non-attendance at meetings and people being online.
Yeah.
And the lack of control over how those people can interact with the meeting. And we had a classic example about 2 weeks ago. We had two people having an argument, if you like, and one was just talking over the top of the other, which is not open debate. I think that's totally inappropriate. And I'd like to see that if somebody's online, then they have to follow the same protocols as those in the meeting, that they have to be invited to speak by the chair. They can't just, even though we've got people in the room that tend to do that as well. I'd like to see that tightened up, and also some restrictions put on the use of online attendance. I think there should be a mandatory personal attendance at meetings, a certain percentage, because otherwise it's easy just to stay away.
Yeah. Now, on the fly, I can probably
so as you're working on inductions and all this sort of thing, it's probably
standing orders and the changes to the post-Cyclone Gabrielle. There were legislative changes about online attendance, and the government essentially enabled online attendance. Standing orders does contain a section about that, and I can't off the top of my head remember if we can change standing orders to remove it, given that it's now legislated. I'd have to look into that.
Oh, it's probably more expectation setting.
But standing orders applies to online and in-person attendance. The same rules should be followed by all. So likewise, an interjection from somebody online should be treated the same way that it's treated should they be there in person.
Yeah.
So the other point is attendance at workshops, because I get extremely frustrated when we spend a lot of time in workshops learning what the subject matter is, and then suddenly we get to a meeting and we go through and relitigate the whole thing again. And it just seems a waste of the time of the people that have taken the effort to attend the workshop. I think that should be built. There has to be some protocols built around that. If you're not prepared to attend the workshop, then you probably should be excluded from voting.
And I think I'd have to check the current code, but certainly there is something in there about attendance at meetings and workshops. If not the current code, then the new code. I'd have to get back to you on that.
I haven't been through the detail of that, Dave, so I'm just raising these as issues that I think.
So where do you think we should be addressing this? Obviously, understanding that we're out, it's not a submission subcommittee thing, but
It's
what-
probably
talking.
one to feedback through Marley for the next triennium.
Yeah, that's what
Obviously, we're going to be having a similar conversation to this one about standing orders when the government publishes that. And I mean, without crystal balling it, I would imagine they'll leave the online attendance in there, but they may not. It's
Okay.
it's hard to pick either way.
I'm planning to send an email this afternoon. And I'll copy in all the council actually to that point alongside what the CE asked about feedback committees and induction for next year. So was one of the points on attendance that I was just looking at this morning was really keen, Dave, for next training to have a lot of sunlight on the attendance. So really crisp amount, attendance for any briefing, workshop, meeting, and having that published to the public via a website page.
So the workshop minutes are published on the website, and
Yeah.
that does detail who's attended.
Yeah, no, it's nowhere.
But of course, the trouble is with the website, of course, everything is published on the website.
A summary.
Even media releases quarterly on it could be good.
Pamela, I'll come to you.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to say that these matters are not on the agenda for this committee today. They are not before this committee today. I think that this is a offline conversation.
Yes, yep. I'll get you to close. Thanks, Jordan.
Uni here mai te uri tapanui kia pātea kia mama. Nā kau te tinana, te hini nalo te ara takatu ki rā e ronga whakari aka ki ronga ki taina. Pamea hui e tāru kire.
Thank you very much. Thank you, committee.
Well done.
This one?
Get the record.
No.